I thought you were just honest. Fascination.
Here.
Good morning, welcome everyone. A couple of changes we're going to make. Let me first of all kind of lay out the expectations for today, and then we're going to make a little bit of an agenda adjustment, and then we'll get into things. But expectations, I think I've sent this out several times, although I continue to get cards and letters from home on a pretty regular basis, and probably just by disclosure, you all need to understand that all of the letters, all of the emails, all of those things that you send do go to, I do get them. I don't respond because I don't believe that as chairman I'm in a position, I don't want to weigh in on anything. So I want you to do it as a group. I want people to have their input. And so we try to keep current with what's going on. A couple of things that have come up, people concerned that we're going to make decisions on this or that in haste, and we're not. There will be 2 more meetings which will be focused primarily on the mapping. As I said back in March, the first part of our agenda is to get the executive order kind of in shape so that the governor can review it. The second part concurrently is to work the maps up to where there's a recommendation on those that equally can be reviewed by the governor. The timeline on where we're headed looks a little bit like this, and let me back up and say this. I recognize that for those who kind of came in new and for those who went through the process before, it feels very different. The reason is that if you go back to 2007, we had nothing to work with, and we started. This time we do have something to work with, and so we're picking up where we've been. As a result, the order has been almost flipped in the way that we've done the analysis and taken public input. The first time through, the SGITs in this very room came up with what we thought the core areas were. They went back out to locals for input. They came back, went back out again, and then ultimately came back to the SGIT. This time we already had polygons, which were the existing core areas. So we went straight out to the local groups. That's the process that's gone through. The other thing we did is we broke it down to a subgroup to work through the mapping as opposed to the entire team trying to do that. And I think that's made for a better quality product and a better, fairer discussion for everyone. So the big thing there is we're not making decisions today. Frankly, we're not making decisions on anything, although we'll be very close on the EO, but on the mapping, it'll be a report. That much said, I know the weather has people, everybody has the weather channel on their phones as I look. We have the weather on the screen, and 4 or 5 people are still staring out the window. So I'm gonna move the mapping report up as soon as Nissa has it complete. She's working on it at home. We're gonna move that up. For those of you who came just to see what happened with the mapping, it hasn't changed. For those who stayed at Game and Fish last night until 10:30 or 11, it has not changed. It's still the same as it was when you left. There were no mystery. We planned that. Tom and Nissa stayed till 4 and James and all. So let's not get those emails started tomorrow. Anyway, we'll try and go through that so that people who want to get on the road and are here primarily to see where the mapping is headed, you can do that and leave. Because it isn't quite ready, we'll start though through the EO. We'll suspend that, take a break, come back, do the mapping report, then we'll go back to the EO. What I really want to get done today is I want to go through the executive order, each of those items, take input as much as possible, have that in a shape that we can move forward to the government. Other thing I would just remind people that the overall timeline. From this group, it'll be a recommendation that will go to the governor, and I'll let Jeremiah describe that process a little bit. But as an executive order, I just want you to know this is not the normal process. Okay, so beware. Normally they're done and then they're executed. Do you know of any who ever had this much public input? No. Do you know of any that had any input from the public at all? Maybe they do. Yeah, I'm kidding. So do you want to talk about timeline and kind of expectations as to deliveries and that sort of thing?
From the point that the governor did?
Yes.
Yeah, let me back up just a little bit because there's been some conversation about why are we going through this? Why the colonoscopy now? There's some confusion about what the executive order calls for. And some only look at one provision of a 5-year time frame, and that's on page 2 of the order where it says we wouldn't alter anything without substantial and compelling information for 5 years. But when Governor Meade executed the order roughly 5 years ago, he added a provision, 4 years ago, I guess, to that executive order that called for all provisions of this executive order to be reevaluated. And we certainly could have done that internally and then looked at re-executing this. And as painful as this has been, it's the right way to do it, to allow for a lot of input into the process. So this is important. Now, we need to talk about how that looks going from here forward, and is 5 years the right time? Is a full reevaluation such as we're doing right now what is necessary or not? So that'll be an important conversation. In terms of when you turn over your recommendations to the governor, as painful as a colonoscopy has been for you, Bob and I get the colonoscopy times 2 going internal to work it through a number of different channels, and those are important channels for us to go through. But we will receive your recommendations. We will then have weekly meetings with our leadership through the course of both June and July to help them understand the recommendations, what our recommentions are relative to those recommendations. And I fully expect to be communicating with the team here to let you know what we're contemplating relative to the work. But we would like to give, or at least I would like to give my boss roughly, no less than 2 weeks, but as much as a month to consider the order before he executes it. And we'll try and execute it as quickly as we possibly can for it to become effective on August 18th of 2015. And then, of course, that will be important for the service as you're continuing to evaluate your listing decisions. Where you want to be at.
Yeah, and I think the other question that comes up is, we've had several say, why do it now? We are actually doing it at the encouragement of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They said, please do it sooner, not later. They get more certainty and more comfort if we've gone through the process while they're doing the evaluation, than if a year from now they've gone through a decision and all of a sudden we say, okay, now we're going to reevaluate. This actually is a much stronger platform to work from.
Yeah.
So it does fit, even though it does seem odd. And I've had a lot of people say, well, why not a year prior? Well, because that isn't the way it was set up. All of this came together, not by design, but by happenstance. So not to worry about that. That is exactly what we've been encouraged. So questions, comments, anybody at the table? All right, I'm going to ask, and you know what, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do introductions. We all know each other like we live in the same house anyway. So if you see somebody you don't know, walk up and say, hi, I'm Gregory, and introduce yourself. You have to do it on your own today. Tom Christensen, I'm going to ask Tom to give us a quick brief on LEC counts. They've been at these now for almost a month, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, at least what I've been hearing from people in the field. So Tom, you want to kind of summarize that for everybody?
So yeah, it will be brief because there's a lot of data that needs to be compiled, but the verbal reports I'm getting from the field of my own observations and those of some of the surrounding states, in particular Colorado and Idaho, suggest that we've got some very noticeable increases this year. Some like double or even triple what they were last year. Don't put that down. Numbers have doubled or tripled this year, but we have LECs that have done that. But I'm very confident that on the broad scale, we're going to show significant increases this year. So I'm going to keep it brief unless you have some questions.
Thanks, Tom. I've talked to 2 or 3 people, and I've been really pleased to hear what they're seeing. One I talked to the other day is finding new LECs in close proximity to others, but LECs that they thought were there and now they're populated and good, robust counts of birds, which is what we expected, but maybe a little better than what we expected.
Better than what we expected, but we need more of what we're having today, so don't cuss this weather.
Absolutely. Okay, with that, Mary, do you want to walk us through, start on the EO? I think we'll get about through 2 or 3 of these, and then we'll probably end up breaking for the mapping, but yeah, Doug.
I just want to be really, I'm glad I'm going to get snowed in my hometown instead of Cheyenne. So thank you.
Well, get the guest room ready.
Yes.
Tell Cindy you got 100 coming over.
We're going to check the invitee list pretty careful, though.
Don't say chickens.
There was a new LEC.
Swing by the lake and grab dinner, will you?
Bring your own bird.
All right, Mary.
Okay, so we do have microphones that are around, and it appears that the YouTube is much clearer. So if you are speaking from the back, if you can just project, there are some microphones and everybody can hear everyone around the table, so that's really good. And for those people that don't have a copy and want a copy, it's on the website as well. So our group was just incredible. We had nearly full attendance every single meeting for about 13 meetings, lasting for about 2 hours to 4 hours apiece. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for the detail that they provided to each other and to the document. And there still might be some occasional oopses that, just in the editing, you kind of get blind to it, but just hats off to everyone. So what I've done, or what we've done, I shouldn't say, what we've done is gone through, and Doug was asked to kind of look at the whereases and now therefore and put them in order, and we've grouped them by category, which is like existing conditions or listing information. So we tried to keep that in order as well. So what I'd like to do is kind of go down row by row and just tell you where, I'll point out where there's no consensus or where there's issues, but otherwise there's been almost 95% consensus on the language.
And look, and before you go, let me just throw one thing out there, because I think at the meeting in Casper, we had a conversation about what the delivery format would be, not by you, but by the governor. And we don't know. The governor may choose to stay very, very narrow and keep it right where it is with a few wording changes. He may choose to add a lot of whereases. That's up to him. So as we go through the whereases in particular and the new additional language, don't sweat that being in or out. Ultimately, that decision will be made by someone else. So if it makes sense to you and you feel like it's important to make that statement, let's do it. So I'm saying err on the side of inclusion as we go through these whereas statements, unless you feel they're incorrect. If you feel they're correct and superfluous, okay, they may be, but that ultimately will be determined by the governor and how he chooses to word the executive. Is that fair? Okay.
Okay, so rows 1 through 5, there was just one, there was a new one. Number 1 is a new, number 2 is no change, 3 is no change, 4 is minor change, everybody agreed, and 5 is existing conditions and no change. So unless anybody has comments, we'll just keep moving. Is that all right, Bob?
Yeah, comments?
Okay.
Fun.
All right. So 6 through 10, Again, this all relates to the listing decision, and 6 through 10, nothing has changed. It was all regarding basically what the Department of Interior has done and is planning to do. So,
Any issues on those?
okay, the next are Wyoming's response to the listing information. 11 is new, and basically we're addressing the request for regulatory mechanisms that we want to maintain. This 12 is the primary legal primacy.
Let's do 11, let's do one at a time because they
Okay,
are.
they're all new. Okay.
Questions, comments on number 11? You're gonna have to jump if you want to talk, so 12.
That's legal primacy.
Okay,
13 is our commitment logistically and financially, and our commitment to continue to invest. Yeah, I don't want to know.
that's what I'm. 14.
14 is that we're committed to the science and maintaining and gathering new science. It's that this is comprehensive throughout the state, and every agency is tasked with similar responsibilities.
16.
No change. Just a minor change. And basically what we wanted to say is that a listing would probably chill any positive conservation activities that were taking place.
Okay,
Okay, 18 was just broadened to include everybody who's been part of this.
okay,
19 is just some minor changes on the core area strategy. Okay,
good.
20 is just the new legislation that took place last year, the year before, and that we believe that this executive order is the regulatory mechanism to conserve greater sagebrush in Wyoming.
Okay,
Okay, 21, it's just new. Just identifying what we believe the executive order does, that it does protect a substantial portion of Wyoming's greater sagebrush and habitat. Okay, 22 again is U.S. Fish and Wildlife. It refers to the letter from 2008 saying that our executive order is a sound policy that should be moved forward. And 23 is just the reaffirmation of that same.
okay,
24, whereas it's just recognizing all the work that has been done with all the federal agencies across Wyoming to avoid what is random acts of conservation to landscape conservation. Okay, 25 is the same thing, is similar, but embellishes on how we've coordinated with the resource management plans and how it is a landscape strategy plan and regulatory mechanism.
Mary, will that triple X, that would be another good number.
I'll highlight that, thank you. All right, let me just get that quick. Thank you.
I think you could either highlight it or just put in approximately 15.
15?
Yeah. And that will allow for any changes that are made either direction.
Okay. 26.
Put approximately.
Approximately.
Okay.
26 is talking about the CCAs and the CCAAs and how that's been a good deal.
Is there any recognition, and I know this is kind of a inter-family cat fight, but there is also the SGI component, and there's a sign up under SGI that is at least has been blessed by the service as an equivalent of a CCAA and it needs to be reflected here.
Okay, moving on. We have a new, and this is investment in this. We kept this in here. It's a bit redundant, but not quite.
And Bob, that is in there.
Yeah.
It says Sage Grouse Initiative.
And
The second line.
Right after CCAA.
Oh, then all you have to do is put in parentheses SGI.
What?
Yeah.
More alcohol for you.
Okay, 27, it's just a reiterate that there has been significant investments of time and money to the implementation, not just the strategy, but to the implementation of the strategy. Okay, 20, are you okay with me just going now?
Yep.
Okay, 28. This is just a minor tweak to adaptive management. I don't even know what it is. And we talk about the results should be stated here, which is basically a summation of some of the activity.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I think, you know, like we've had so many DBCTs and we've complied with so many and we've done just a track record.
There's some metrics on enforcement.
Okay.
That not only what are we doing, but what are we planning to do, but this is what we've done and it matches. Okay, then we go into number 29, governor's authority. And there's no change. 30 is the addition from Dan, talking about all the attachments and the comprehensiveness of all the paper that goes with this order.
And thank you, Dan, for that. That's a big help. I think that was a good catch at the last meeting, and the language here really does do what we want it to. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
Okay, 31 is just minor changes, clarifications. Okay, 32 is the, what we did is we combined valid existing rights statement with existing land uses and put them in the same box.
Should,
Like,
the valid existing right should, but we had a shall there. I thought we changed that at the last meeting.
No, we didn't change anything at the last meeting, this meeting.
Okay.
I did say, there was a question about whether or not this was in or out. And it's in.
It's in.
Yeah. Well, that's up to you guys. You like shall better than should?
Yes.
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 Everybody agree to make that change? Okay. Okay?
Okay, 33, that was just minor changes to the existing conditions and Wyoming's response. Just saying that we might have some things that we don't know about. 34. I may have screwed up on this, but there's just a few minor changes, but this document, or this paragraph is probably in about 4 other places. This was one of those ones that we all felt strongly about redundancy throughout the document. Okay. 35. Basically, the group decided to identify all the agencies under the state of Wyoming that are participating in this. And we have 36.
Mayor, just
Yes.
one question. Did you capture the absent language, the 5 years? Did that get moved elsewhere? in 35?
Yes, yes,
Mary, on 35,
yes,
that is aimed specifically at regulatory agencies, correct?
yes.
I think we probably should say regulatory agencies. Because the first question somebody is going to have when they look at this is, what about game and fish? What about, and the point here is you're trying to get regulatory agencies apart. So I would suggest you add the word regulatory.
Got it. Okay, 36. Other measures, just a little bit more explanation. And basically what we wanted to say is that that second paragraph was the additional, and if the projects comply, that it is our expectation that there'll be no declines.
It's much clearer. It's longer.
Okay, 37, there's just some minor changes about incentive.
Just a comment on that one, Bob. In our mapping subcommittees, as we looked at maps, sometimes we heard comments that we should add something into core so that it will receive an incentive to get subsidies or whatever it might be. And I don't think that's really the intent of what we're trying to do with the core area strategy. That's great if it's already in core, but just to add it, just so that there can be an incentive, I have trouble with that.
We didn't do that.
I don't think we did it anywhere. But there's
There's a difficulty there, and it comes up at times. You'll have people say that it could be two neighboring landowners. One saying, I really want to be in core because that moves me into a prioritization for range improvements for other things. And another saying that they're concerned about being in core because it will not give them that opportunity. I think that really, if we start drawing core areas based on opportunity as opposed to biology, we are really headed down a rabbit hole we'd rather stay out of. So I think I'm saying I concur with what you're saying there. Let the biology drive it, correct. Other than where we have huge disturbance, that's another issue. Okay.
Okay, 38, we talked about a non-regulatory approach. Now, Joe, you may have to speak up, I've got a comment there that you have concerns about.
Yeah, my concern was with the changing of shall to may. There's some other changes with some of the other language, but I think we talked about it last week and it's nothing. I think it's fine how it is, the new language.
Okay, 39.
Well, I want to have a little discussion on this one. That's a pretty major change.
Which one?
And not that I disagree with the change or anything, but I think let's make sure we have a level of comfort here with this, because what it was saying originally is, as much as possible, let's do it in a non-regulatory fashion. After 8 years of operation, where I think we've got a pretty reasonable regulatory framework, that is less a fear to some people, but there still needs to be a strong voluntary commitment. So does this reflect somewhat of a change in philosophy? Because the two statements are not one and the same. They are a different approach.
I think the intent was to reflect on the regulatory certainty that fish could expect through the.
Okay, but you've done that with all your regulatory statements that have come before.
Understood. This
This is an add-on.
I think it's going to be an affirmative thing, not just a negative. When you're saying it can reflect localized conditions, I mean, it certainly should reflect.
Oh, no, I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing the language at the very beginning.
Okay.
And I'd throw this on the table as a suggestion. This is a place where a shall was turned to a may and probably should have been a should. You don't mandate it, but it would be your preference as opposed to may, which would be your choice.
You did flip through all the available.
I'm sure you did. So explain to me why you ended where you did.
Well, I think Brian kind of talked about it. That was the push to move, to signal that, you know, we still want to use voluntary, but that it's a second tier, it's not our first goal.
Yeah, may certainly reflects voluntary as opposed to statutory. That was how we got to may.
Okay, let me take you back to the beginning of this. It wasn't may. Right now, without an executive order, you may do all the voluntary stuff in the world you want. You don't have to put that in the order. But if what the order is trying to say is do this first, where you can, the word should be stronger than may. And shall is probably too strong. That would be.
I think the should is probably more appropriate, just, you know, and we discussed moving away from shall.
Yeah.
To something of a more voluntary nature, but I think the should puts a little more emphasis on if you can do it in a non-regulatory fashion, that would be preferable. So I guess maybe I would suggest we take that.
Leave it back
Take your
should.
Should.
Leave it what it was, but with the new language.
It was shall.
It was
so.
shall.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
So
should be should.
Should be should.
So, okay.
I'm not sure may was either.
Further down, why was it changed to permit stipulations as opposed to management alternatives?
Say that again, management.
Why was the original management alternatives changed to the language permit stipulations?
I think the discussion was that management alternative isn't really anything solid, but a permit stipulation is the end product. And there may be deviations from the stipulations here that are reflected. So an alternative is not a permitting document.
Once again, I would raise the question of may and should.
Should.
Okay?
Well, if I may,
Yeah.
quick comment on this. If I remember correctly,
what we talked about was that the reason that Fish and Wildlife Service made its listing decision was they cited the absence of effective regulatory mechanism as the primary basis for their decision. So we created that regulatory mechanism. And if we left shall in, and we're saying we have this wonderful regulatory mechanism, but we're saying to everyone, we shall use a non-regulatory approach. And that just didn't work. That's why we wanted to preserve the option of a non-regulatory approach. That's what the word may does.
But doesn't should do that as well?
I'm more comfortable, yeah, shall to should or may.
Yeah, shall is out. I mean, that's off the table. I think we're all there. But I think may is just kind of wishy-washy. You can do what you want, is what may says. But should says, this is the direction you should try to go. This is where we want you to be.
Places more emphasis.
Correct.
I'm happier with should. As I said, I'm not sure may belongs in an order.
Exactly. Okay,
Good point.
all right, I think we're good. Violent agreement, move on.
Okay,
So hold on, before you move, are we going back to the original language with should, or are we keeping our proposed stuff with should?
No, what you have, just change two mays to shoulds.
There's two shoulds now. In the first one, there was a shall and a should.
Right. Well, I'll give you credit. You guys were consistent. You changed both of the others to one word. We don't like it, so.
all right. 39 is just kind of defining where we're at in terms of number of birds and acreage and core.
More metrics that we can apply with there.
I don't want birds in there, guys. That's a snapshot in time. I'm listening to the counsel of my long, tall friend from Green River. It says that, you know, I don't think we want to do that. I think you can do acreage, because that isn't going to change overnight. But Tom, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I have that. It depends on how you frame that quote number of birds, I guess. You do it as a percentage of the range-wide population, that 38% or something. That's a more general figure that, you know, we're all kind of going ups and downs at the same time with exceptions. But I agree with the snapshot of time. If you really truly mean number of birds in 2015, that's.
No, actually, what we talked about was just what you said, the percentage, so you have a general picture that lasts for some time. But we just weren't there on the data yet. We were trying to wait for roundup data before it's put in. Am I correct on that, guys? I mean, that's where we were headed. It's not, you know, how many birds there were, but what percentage of the population was westwide.
What's the purpose of adding this? What does it add to the order?
Well, let me try to take a shot at that. One is, as you move forward and do the evaluation on listing, if we've got 35% of the birds, that's pretty important. How important, I don't know, but this did not read a percentage range wide. This read to me a population. And so,
Yeah, it did. It read a number. It was a
No, I'm
hard-
saying that's not the intent
Right.
was that we reflect the percentage of birds in the overall population. I think the metrics, I bet everybody's probably sick and tired of me saying metrics, but I think being able to report metrics is something where the service can go through it and go, oh, because, you know, we're hearing equivalency discussions about Colorado's population versus Wyoming's population. And one leading us to a listing or not. And it's with 3% versus 38%. We need to make sure, again, the objective overall, and I think anybody reading this starts to get it, was that this read as a narrative for somebody who's examining our plan, so they get the points. And I think some of the points are best delivered with good metrics.
Well, my question is, and Tom, I think is most appropriately directed to you. My understanding is we currently don't have a statistically valid method today of estimating the sage-grouse population. So what is the right metric if we were to put something in there?
Yeah, that's where I was getting at, that percentage of range. That's pretty defensible. My question then would be, if you're using a broader number like that, and even the acreage, should that actually be a whereas statement?
Yeah, I was headed there next.
I do believe we have it in one of the attachments, framed the way that you're talking about, you know, it's,
Attachment
Thank you, I couldn't remember which one. So it is in the document in some other place, and then we wanted to raise it to a higher level in the whereas. That's how it ended up in here.
Okay,
But it's not a whereas right now.
my medical diagnosis here is that this one's really in deep trouble. I concur with Tom.
In our.
I wish you guys would quit talking about that. I have one next month. They told me it goes through your mouth. Okay.
We better put this behind us and move on.
Okay. How many want this out? How many want to leave it in?
I think we need a metric somewhere.
You got it.
Percentage.
It's the executive order, though, not in the attachment.
Okay, how many think it belongs in the whereas and not in the order?
It's in the whereas.
I think a whereas.
It's already there?
Well,
No, it wasn't the attachment, we put it to the whereas.
The attachments have the full force and effect of the executive order, though.
Part of our concern, Bob, was so many people, because there's attachments, they look at this, they kind of don't necessarily delve into all the various attachments.
Gotcha.
So we wanted it up front, is what we were looking at.
Well, if we go back to number 4 of the whereases,
Yeah.
I do want to note there was some discussion on number 4 with the quote minor change where it says whereas despite population declines. There was more than a little bit of discussion about, do we need that language in there? If we're going to add metrics or some, whether it's the 24%, 82%, that's probably the most appropriate place to put it is in that whereas.
I see a lot of heads nodding. Maybe that's where we combine them and put them both in 4. That puts it right up front, which is where it should be. Are we good with that, folks? All right, so Mary, yeah.
I think the purpose of that, if you follow the flow of the executive order, is we have all these rationales. Therefore, Wyoming's going to do these things. And because of these things, we are going to have a protective strategy for this percent, this acreage and this, not number of birds, but a percent, and that percentage is going to mush one way or the other. But the idea, I think, of having something in here was to say, because we're doing these things, therefore, we are going to have a protective strategy, regulatory and non-regulatory, that will encompass this acreage and this populate, not birds, but this. And I think that was the rationale for that. Now, the way it starts off here, it's probably, that's why it's gray, is the wording there was, we need to think about how that should be worded. But I think having that in here is good rationale for our therefore we're doing these things and it will therefore do this.
Even in spite of this polyp, I think we should acknowledge that Doug went through this painfully and got it in an order where it reads. So I really want to listen to him and, as to making it read as a narrative.
Yeah, thanks, Doug, for doing that.
And if it's necessary in the I'm not saying don't put it in the whereas, but I think we need some statement in our therefores that reinforces what we believe our conservation strategy will do. And we're going to, if we're going to protect 30%, that's pretty crummy. I think what we're doing is good. If you remember when we started this whole thing, we said, we're going to protect 80% of the birds. Okay, Fish and Wildlife says that's a pretty good strategy. I think we're upping the ante in this, rerun here and the remapping and everything. So I think it's important to have that in there, that we believe this is going to protect this significant portion of birds.
For what it's worth, I've talked over the sort of whereas therefore discussion with Michael B. And he's very interested in having therefores reflect the whereas. That you go through and you say, basically you're going, here's the problem, here's what we've done about it. So I just would suggest that there's some merit to having a therefore for every whereas.
Hey, but, go ahead.
Doug, I think the big issue here, now that we're starting to take a look at this with those numbers, is the fact that we've already done it versus when we did this the first time. And I do think it's important for us to say that up front. Whereas the state of Wyoming currently enjoys the greatest populations of sage grouse and has, plug in those metrics to what we've already done.
I would not argue against that at all. What I would say is that there should be a therefore what we've done.
Therefore, we're going to continue to do it via the core area strategy.
But therefore is an action item. It's not a statement.
Right.
Correct.
This is a statement.
We need to turn it into.
That's why this
So
needs
you
to be
either
aware.
need to make it an action item because it carries the force of law.
Right.
So are you going to say legally we have this? Well, that it doesn't fit what should be there. I think all of the intent, everything else you're talking about, we can accommodate in forward. Does that make sense? I don't know what the action item here is.
I think what Paul said is to continue to maintain and develop what we have in the way of population and habitat.
Yeah, and Wyoming maintains 35% of the sage grouse across this range or whatever, but it's a statement of the condition on the ground as stated in the whereas. And then therefore, Wyoming is going to continue to protect that population of birds through the rest of the EO.
Yeah, Mary's been working on very usual.
I think we need to be really.
Here, let me tell you, and don't take this wrong. It would not be a bad thing for us to maintain the number of birds we have in the cyclic condition they're in and see the percentage range wide drop. Because that would mean the other states are getting more birds proportionate to us. That's more across the board. So I don't want to see us say, well, we're going to maintain X percent of the birds, when in fact we're trying to encourage all states to get more birds.
I'm in agreement that that belongs up front.
Yeah.
And then in the therefore, we will continue to maintain habitat at a level commensurate with the population within the state of Wyoming, We've got a plan, and it's a regulatory plan, therefore.
Mary, you're getting closer. I think if you were, now let's try this. Wyoming will continue to manage approximately 15 million acres of core habitat area to maintain the optimal number of birds associated with the habitat or something like that. I'm really leery of a number of birds.
So I don't think we can go there.
I mean,
I'm not even suggesting
not even a percentage.
No,
the percentage belongs up front.
All right.
Where we're, and frankly, that's where I would like to see it as in whereas is more than therefore. So I have no problem with it. I think having one that's commensurate though to Doug's reading is appropriate.
Okay, so here's what I want to do. So we'll kick this back to your group. Look, you've gone through 39 of them, had none kicked back. You got 2 now, and we're about a little tiny bit.
It's like, no.
I think that's commendable. And besides, you all started to bond with each other. I don't want to have any kind of removal anxiety and tears, and all that. So,
Bob, I think you should know the password to our WebEx this last meeting was no more.
So now you've made Mary a liar.
well.
No more number 2.
That's called wishful thinking. Okay, let's move on.
All right. Okay, so the fire was no change. That's Wyoming's response. You guys paid attention to those passwords.
They were cute.
All right, 41. There was minor changes to this. We wanted to part of the intent with the change in the inclusion of non-core area is that non-core area is doesn't have a zero target on it, or a target on it, so you can do whatever. But they will work collaboratively to still try to protect safe trails in the economy, and we'll use incentives and prioritization and streamlining and all those good things. Okay, 42, just a minor change again on collaboration. 43 is just some minor changes in the wording. Encourage enrollment and just participate, do whatever they can to help support the enrollment, voluntary enrollment in these programs. 44, we move to B.
Well, on 43, do we need to add the SGI in there too? Or not?
We got to say there are other programs as well that reflect safe trails management, UNRCS, but SGI does merit attention.
We have USDA, so I don't think they can just change USDA and RCS.
What we wanted to do is if the program name changes, whereas CCAs is one of the, it's a rural, isn't it in the rules? CCA is a rural related, no, it's a program related. And then we should have one in the other.
Mary, you kind of glanced over it. You talked about voluntary enrollment.
Yeah, and I said, yeah,
Do we want to make that
yeah,
change?
voluntary.
I think you're okay here, guys. I think where you've got the catch-all for USDA and fish, that would include partners, that would include SGI, that would include regular equip. I think you're all right here.
Okay.
And you've called out SGI earlier, so.
Was there any discussion about going like to HCP as well, or going beyond just CCA stuff?
That's
in state support?
post.
Yeah, true, but.
No.
Okay.
Okay, 44, we move to B. Existing rights should be recognized and respected, and that we moved up to 35. Adaptive management would be outlined in attachment G. And we just expanded that a little bit to say that we're going to keep looking at the science and what's happening on the ground.
Where did you see that to?
It's a
35.
Mary, one of the other things that we included in this bullet was trying to make a more strong connection to the local working groups so that they get more engaged in that whole process.
And they're recognized
Yeah,
for their contributions.
Before we move on, so in here, in 46, it talks about as outlined in attachment G, and we at one point as a group were allowed to look at that, and then it was put back into the governor's office. Could you explain that a little bit, and are we going to get a chance to review it?
Yeah, attachment G references the federal adaptive management strategy that we have been working on now for 6 months, buddy. Jeremiah, at least.
No longer than that.
Maybe, yeah. All we want to do is be sure that we mirror the adaptive management strategy that comes out through the 9 plan. That'll be retroactive to Lander because it wasn't done and Lander's finished. Same with Buffalo, same with Bighorn Basin. So for us to plug something in now prior to having all that language in place could put us at odds with the federal deal. The beauty of the way that the federal adaptive management has been worked out, and it has been worked out, many thanks to Buddy, to Jenny, to Pam, to Wyoming BLM, we've been included in that process the entire way. So the state has a stake in that adaptive management process. The original design was that it was all in-house to the agency. Well, clearly that doesn't work very well given our executive order, given the way we work together in Wyoming. So we don't know what it says yet. When it's done, it will already be in a legal format. And then I think we'll reference it as opposed to adopt it verbatim. I
And
don't
so,
know where we're gonna go, but the language that you saw was a draft as of that date.
and it's being written by BLM, is the Forest Service involved as well?
Yes.
So it's not just one agency?
And so is fish. We're trying to get a single adaptive management strategy that will apply. And where it becomes critical in the part when we said, let's just pull it out, let's pull it out of that attachment G, is every state's gonna be different as to their soft and hard triggers, to their thresholds and how they address them. In Idaho, as an example, they have a 3-tiered core system, kind of a super core, core, son of core. Not crazy about it, is that a fair description?
Yes.
Horrible.
But that's what they chose. If it works for Idaho, great. Let Idaho do what works for Idaho. But their adaptive management then is, if anything happens in son of core, it becomes core. And if anything happens in core, it becomes super core. Well, that doesn't fit us. So we have an adaptive management strategy that has thresholds, triggers. It immediately institutes a local analysis, which includes BLM, game and fish, and permittees if necessary. That by permittees, I mean grazing or otherwise. There's hard triggers in there. You do that threshold, you cease activity, and then you evaluate. It triggers a statewide review. It's a very robust, very well thought out process, but it isn't done yet. So that's why we pulled it back.
And is it scheduled to be done in June? So-
Yes. Right? Buddy's shaking his head.
And this mirrors, I don't know if you recall or not, Caleb Heiner and others have been at previous SGIT meetings outlining that framework that Bob just described. I would say that throughout the process, that fundamental framework has been fairly consistent. Would you say, Bob?
And I mean, not to take credit where it's undue, but I think it is. That adaptive management that is becoming the model came out of this group. That's where it came from. It was the Caleb and everybody working here saying, this is what would work really well, not this is what would work for us, but would work really well. And the other states now are picking that up and using it in their states. So until we kind of know what it looks like in the plans, I don't want to get the cart ahead of the horse. But it's I mean, Joy, if you want to see it, if you're concerned about seeing and knowing what's in it, it's a public document. When we've got it, we'll make that available. Other questions, comments, thoughts on that, Lyndon?
Well, mine goes more towards the attachment B part. I don't know if G and B need to be separated, but the question I have is, attachment B to this executive order shall be reevaluated on a continuous basis and at a minimum annually. Is that realistic? And if it is, what will be then the consequence? In other words, so it's reviewed annually, so what are we gonna do with it?
I think the example we looked at is like when there's stipulations. You know, it was brought up, we worked it through the process. It was something that, I mean, we're probably not gonna go through everyone, but as new science comes out, are we doing the right thing for the bird? So it's part of the adaptive management. That's the way I think we looked at it. Is that correct? It's not going to do this exercise every year.
So I think we have to be careful that the language doesn't suggest we're going to go through this exercise every year.
Kind of does, actually, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
When I was formatting this, I think one of my suggestions was to split that second part of that off, because we're actually talking about adaptive management, which is in kind of a change in progress. And the second one is talking about almost the amendability of the executive order, and we'll get into that down in number 51. I think this group really needs to look at, we're going to look at, I mean, monitor and see what's going on annually. We're going to do that. We'll look at, see if things are working. But I think the question is kind of gray in our last provisions, and those are essentially the amendability provisions of this executive order. How often are we going to change our map? How often are we going to change stipulations or protective strategies? And it's not clear in here what I know for a fact the mapping guys don't want to do that once a year. They pretty much said that last night, late into the night. So I think we need to maybe, and we didn't have the answer, we kind of raised that question. How often do we want to change things? Because if we change them too often, then the service is going to say, well, you know, they're moving this thing all the time. You know, we have no consistency or no continuity, okay? But if we leave something wrong in place too long, then we jeopardize the success of our conservation strategy. So I think we need to, as a group, figure out, we do want to look at the science, new science. I think it says substantial, compelling information. We need to look at that. But the question is, when we look at that, when will we make a change is not clear in this document. And I'm kind of jumping ahead there, but you know, when I formatted this, that one provision, it was almost like it probably needs, that second sentence needs to go down into that amendability provisions.
All right, so let me try to separate this, because I think you got three things lumped into one block here. It started out with the recognition of local working groups, and you tried to beef that up. I think that probably should be your number 46. Stick with one topic, the local working group. And adaptive management can be a statement that the state of Wyoming shall participate in adaptive management strategies with appropriate federal agents, local, state, and federal agencies. That's a placeholder that says we will be a partner in adaptive management. Doesn't pick a design, doesn't import an attachment or anything else. And the third one, Doug, that you're talking about is actually a mirror to number 51, only it's talking about stipulations in Appendix B as opposed to mapping. Right. And ideally, on all of these, we're looking and contemplating adjustments all the time, except on the mapping, because we didn't want to end up moving lines. But on the other, you can say the same thing. Absent compelling and convincing information, stipulations shall not be altered, but shall be reviewed in a timely fashion. I think does that separate those three and put them kind of in an order that makes more sense?
Yeah, and I think, so I started looking on that on a continuous basis and at a minimum annually, just getting rid of that, but rewording it to the mapping. So you have the mapping and the stipulations.
Yes. In two separate boxes, two separate statements.
Yeah.
That's much more emphatic, it's clearer, and they're back to back.
I'm going to celebrate the fact that Bob has made this thing longer.
The what?
I am not.
I'm actually going to try to make it a little longer right now too. Another suggestion. I think we addressed adaptive management G, we addressed protective stipulations, and I think everybody knows I'm not particularly fond of the term mitigation framework, but I think somewhere we have to start to establish what that framework is, partly in recognition of that's the way the service looks at it, but we need to figure out a category or an attachment or a reference that says this is how Wyoming views its mitigation framework for development.
I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
I don't disagree with the need to get to that point. I don't think we're even remotely close to being there.
I would agree on the science. We aren't all the way there
On
yet.
the policy side.
Okay.
I don't think on either one. I mean, BLM isn't there yet. Bitch, you guys aren't even there yet. You're still in.
Well, being ahead of them has never stopped us before.
I agree.
So I just want to keep that suggestion before this committee. This is something that we will continue to face, and we need to figure out how we deal with it in the long term. So if it's the consensus of the committee that we're not ready to jump into that, fine. And we started our research project this year that is based on heading towards being able to have a toolbox to make mitigation decisions. So I just suggest that we keep that in our minds as we go forward.
Well, and I'll say that our mitigation policies is just going draft, but we do have the Sage Grouse framework that is final, that follows the CEQ hierarchy. So.
I want to come back to the attachment B. And again, what is the intent? Giving that more clarification. Yes, we're going to reevaluate it. Does that mean that a particular activity in core could be subject to changing regulations if once we reevaluate and we determine that something's not, let's say the DDCT thing as we know it is implemented, goes forward, and then a few years later we see that something's not working. Does that mean that a certain activity in that area is going to be subject to new or different stipulations?
It could. The way that it's laid out, it could. I think that would require a pretty major change on the part of the governor. I don't think you're going to make those kind of adjustments just willy-nilly. With you saying that, it helped too also. I would not use the word reevaluate. I would use the word evaluate. You're looking at what you do at all times. That's responsible. But reevaluate means you're assuming there's something wrong and you're back and you assume you're going to change it. That is not the case. The point here is we're constantly trying to use the best science, the best information we have to make the right decision. That may mean that we actually relax some stipulations. It may be that some of them aren't doing what they were intended. We have to evaluate and determine what works better. And we have a pretty good track record of doing both and doing that in a very open type forum. So I think the point that what I think we were trying to get to is we're not going to do this every year. We're not going to go through this process on an annual basis, whether it's mapping or the core area strategy. And I would remind people, we've had 8 years to operate under this thing. This is a good time to take a look and say, how are we doing? But if you'll go back through this EO and look at the rather minimal amount of changes suggested, it says you did it pretty damn well the first time. But you have identified some things and said, we can do better, we can be clearer, we can do this in a different way. We just want that door left open. Does that help at all?
I think
it's not a mandate, it's a permission almost, is what I would say. Yeah, we're going to constantly evaluate what we do, but it doesn't mean you have to go back and reissue everything.
Right.
And should that be expressed a little bit more clearly and maybe develop some criteria regarding timing as far as when, changes to the EO will be made or, within.
We had this conversation on the way up. You want to dive into that timing? I mean, it's going to relate to all this, so let's just do it.
But the conversation we had is it set to an appropriate trigger in time? Or do we trigger at a point in time consideration, perhaps not in the way that we're doing it now, but a consideration of provisions or some element of the order? I don't have an answer for that, but I think we need to consider all of the options.
I think it gives you the full range of options. I think I told you the last time, Utah went a long time with no executive order, and then they actually had 2 executive orders in one day. Because the first one had a 2-year sunset. Everybody went, well, that doesn't mean anything. So the second one, they took the 2-year sunset out and did the signing again that afternoon. 2 years isn't long enough. 5 years was put in ours to provide assurance to the service that we weren't going to change anything.
Right, so that's kind of, I guess.
Okay, but 5 years is really plucked out of thin air. And so there's discussion about 7 or 8. The other extreme is, why put one in there at all? Why not just say this is in effect?
Well, I guess that is the discussion point, because does the timing allow for some assurance to the Fish and Wildlife Service that, hey, that, you know, the main pieces of this aren't going to just be changed regularly?
I can see it both ways. Putting a time limit of 5 years gives us some assurance that it'll go from one administration to another, but knowing that the governor can rescind it at any time doesn't necessarily give us that assurance.
No.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
What does being silent?
Excuse me?
What does no time period in it at all do? Does it give you more or less confidence?
Probably about the same.
Especially since if, you know, the government can go in and change it at any point. Doesn't seem like the timing.
I mean, I know the
Limitation
mapping
is
group would like
necessary.
this to be done annually, but I don't think.
We're actually gonna recommend monthly. but-
Yeah.
So, and let me ask those of you that are on the mapping group, is in going through your colonoscopy, is there a time that you think would be appropriate? Is there a 7-year review? Is there something that jumps out at you that you'd say, we ought to at least open it up every such and such? I think anything below 5 is not going to fly.
One of the things, and I talked about this a little bit last night, that the SGIT as a whole is going to need to come to grips with is what time frame gives regulatory certainty for developers.
Exactly.
We can't expect people to invest in projects with this cloud hanging over their head that the rug could be jerked out from under them in the next 2 years. And it's a tough one. I don't know, I don't have the answers either, but I think it's a critical part of the whole core area strategy.
So let's dissect it a minute. If the first words are absent compelling information, what would be a period where you would expect a review to take place? Because when it says absent compelling, that means with compelling, you can change it when need be, right?
20.
Okay, I mean, throw them out there.
And I'm being dead serious about that, because definition of compelling, and if this group significantly changes dynamics in 2 years, what's compelling to you or somebody else could be very different down the line. And even with the current 5 years, given what we have seen the last few months, there is not regulatory certainty on what is core, non-core on any angle you look at. Correct? There have been proposals from all angles that substantially could change the landscape. It's really hard to invest from an ag perspective, from an oil and gas perspective, from a mining perspective, from a conservation perspective, when we don't have robust, well thought out, implemented sideboards for what should and shouldn't be included, since we already have a base established, and we have a base established that works. I think we're starting to see some very strong proof and evidence that what we did works and has worked to a great degree. So from that standpoint, we have very little incentive if every 3 years or 5 years, the rug could get pulled out from under us. Very little incentive to develop a non-core, when we're saying in line 35, here's the incentives to develop a non-core. Get going, let's streamline it, let's create that balance, which we still don't have today. And I think that's important for the group to consider. That balance we talked about and started talking about in 2007, we still have not achieved. And I strongly believe we've taken a step back through this mapping exercise and created, you know, the need for, you know, colonoscopy, you know, all that fun stuff by the very process without more rigorous sideboards. So part of what I would recommend is if we're not going to put a time frame on it, we make sure that compelling is thoroughly vetted, whatever that is.
Or remember compelling to who?
Yeah.
Correct. That's why we need a better.
The guy that wrote.
True.
What's our standard for determining that? Is it the fact that USGS puts a study out on climate change and you should change our whole perspective on it?
I'd say we kind of have to go back to how CORE was designed with the biologically compelling evidence.
That wasn't the only factor though in determining.
No, I know, there's details in.
I don't think we have a standard that we can apply out there that says, that other than that this committee has to consider it compelling information to guide our movement. I would also suggest that 7 years is probably a better reach for us. I think putting 20 down could call some pretty good heat on the governor who signs it. But 7 does reach over into at least a second administration, and you know, gives us a lot more room to work within the bounds that we've created for ourselves. I'm as concerned, I think, as anybody else about moving of the map when we're really trying to get a grasp on what our impacts are. When we're studying what we're doing and we're moving what that base information is, we're not studying what we're doing.
So should the standard be when we do that evaluation that the team is looking for substantial and compelling reasons to change something rather than just simply opening up the playbook and saying, let's look at every component of this ordinance? And I think that's perhaps the missing element.
And what's the metric for those reasons? I guess this is a question as much as a comment. If we're looking at how often this would be evaluated, whatever, evaluated against what? What are we trying to accomplish? Do we have objectives that should have a comparable time frame? Is there a nexus here maybe to the COD objectives in terms of implementation versus when we look at and review this? I don't know, Bob, it's as much a question as it is a comment, so.
Go ahead.
I think maybe it'd be a good exercise to look, okay, we've just done 5 years. How has it worked? Has that framework of 5 years, has that worked? Has it been too short for industry? Has that, because I know they've brought projects here that have kind of either, they're on that borderline of disturbance or so on and so forth. Wherever we set it, there's somebody going to get caught in that change. But I kind of agree that Paul, maybe not 20 years, but I think there needs to be some, let's not be tinkering with this and changing it every year, especially mapping. That's maybe 40 years down the road. But I mean, let's leave things as they are with a process like we've done in this group for the last 5 years. We have a process. If Paul comes in and says, hey, you know, I have this proposal, we've heard them. Okay, has that worked? I mean, is that a reasonable process? If we put the game rules 10 years down the road with the assurance for industry that, yeah, you run up against something, come to SGIT like we've done. Is that working in everybody's opinion, or is it not? Is it for industry? Is it?
I would say every proponent thought they had compelling evidence to add or move or do whatever, so it is a definitional problem. But I guess I was questioning whether there's any value in, I think most land use plans are 10 years. Is there any value in looking at that timeline?
Other than we don't want to try to imitate NEPA. So I would pick 9 or 11, but I wouldn't pick 10.
Bob, I guess the first question we should ask ourselves when we're talking about review is, have we been successful to date? And if we have met or exceeded our original goals, why would we make a change? It's working. There may be some very, very, specific cases out there we need to address, but that should always be our first question. Have we accomplished our goals?
Let me throw this at you, okay? Great conversation. What it leads me back to is if you look under number 50, the old language in 50, and make a couple changes to that, to where it would say the protective stipulations outlined should be evaluated on a continuous basis as new science, information, and data emerge regarding CPAs and the habitat behaviors of greater sage-grouse. Then add from your mapping language, but absent substantial and compelling information, they should not be altered. And then add any changes should involve a robust and transparent process, so that now you have those two mirroring each other, both the map and the other. As long as you're looking at them on a continuous basis, I don't know that you need to have a formalized review. The governor then can say, this order shall stand until whatever date the governor chooses, be that 7 years, 9 years, any date other than 10. But does that actually get more to what I'm hearing in the conversation? What I'm hearing is, yeah, we want to stay up with the science. We don't want to make willy-nilly changes to either the map or the STIPs and the standards we have. Well, that's exactly what you're saying, Paul, is we continually do that. That's why we meet. That's why we have the conversations we do. And I would throw out as examples the noise issue that we're trying to deal with. All of the different science that keeps coming in, that's important to do that. Does that mean you change the order? No, not necessarily. But when you do, you engage in a very open process that says, hey, here's what we're proposing. And I think that's consistent with a lot of the comments that we've had throughout this process. I think and I'll share this with you, I think as much as the intent I completely concur with when it said no changes for 5 years, it kind of turned it into a federal land management plan where it was mandated that we do this exercise. So we're doing it. Do I think we need to do this every 5 years? Absolutely not. If that's it, disband and every 5 years put the group together, run through and do this thing, and no, that's not the point. The point is we've got a very, very involved group of citizens and professionals here. We have an even greater involved group of people from our state who attend these meetings. That's how it should work. So does that get us to where we want to be, which is we're always going to review both. We're going to consider things, but we're not going to go to oh, look, let's start hiring the consultants to draw the new plan up. We're staying the course here, and it's proven to work. Thoughts about that?
I just reflect on it a bit and say that we should probably take some comfort in the fact that this has been a test run. It sounds like a long time to us that we've been at this.
Feels like a long time.
Yeah. But in the biology of things and in the world of development and the world of bird here, it's not been a very long time. And we have picked up a great deal of knowledge. When we started this project, we didn't know where forward habitat was. We didn't know a lot of the angles that we had to go out and develop. We should see a sort of descending column of conflict here because we're knowing more and more and more about what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. So I think everybody should a bit take a deep breath and go, we don't have to anticipate quite as much conflict going forward as we have had in the past.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. One more, go ahead.
I guess to answer your question, no. I don't think it's getting to where we want to be because we'll take the extreme interpretation, just what you said. We're going to review this and it's absent, compelling evidence, won't do anything. But if this group decides that, whatever comes in, and we start changing the process, that project approval process, we start changing that, we're giving industry a moving target and the certainty that they need to draw that capital in. So I guess I'm looking for a little more certainty, because the way you just said it, we could meet quarterly and say, well, we have this new compelling evidence and therefore, we're gonna change, now you can't do this, or we have new noise thing or new whatever. It doesn't give industry that certainty I think they would be more comfortable with. I would like it tightened up a little bit. I don't have, that's why I raised the question is, how often can we do this? We're saying, well, we're gonna look at it all the time and annually we're gonna evaluate it.
I took that out.
Well, okay, well.
Okay, here's what we're gonna do,
Yeah.
right? We're gonna take a break.
Just one more thing.
Yeah.
This area before we leave it.
We're not gonna come back. Go ahead.
Okay, well, on 51, a couple of voice things, at the risk of jumping into the should, shall, may discussion. In the context of, say, 51, which I heard you include in part of your suggestion, should perhaps be will, because it is the governor's voice here. He is saying he will not do this without substantial compelling information. The other part, and for risk of somebody suggesting that I'm saying there shouldn't be a robust, transparent process, because we've obviously engaged in that. I don't know that I'm in the business of constraining a future governor on how they want to execute an order. So be very careful as you're looking at that sort of language. We certainly will.
Okay? All right, let's take,
Do we have an opportunity to make a comment?
you will after we come back.
Okay.
We're gonna take a break, we're gonna come back, and this is gonna, and Tom, we're gonna talk mapping, and then we're gonna come back to this, because this is the remainder of the day is gonna be here. But I want people to have time to discuss this. I think it's a big enough topic. I want people to have 15 minutes, kick it around, share some ideas, and then after we do the mapping, we'll come back.